You'd think that giving to the needy would be a fairly simple thing. Well, not necessarily so, says Jesus. It's not like the Nike commercial. It's not just a matter of doing it. Stay tuned to find out how you can give without hypocrisy. Hi, this is Pastor Mark Pierce of Church Requel on this Thursday, May the 21st. I am here standing in front of the Mansfield Playhouse, and you'll see why that is so appropriate here to our Bible lesson here in just a moment. But, I've been trying to do these studies from different locations, and Mansfield Playhouse is one of my personal favorite places in Mansfield. Every city, every town has its quirky aspects, and the Mansfield Playhouse has kind of a unique setting here in Mansfield because right across the street from me is the police department. And so you'll be here for a nice play, and right in the middle of everything, the sirens will go off. You just never know what might happen here at the Mansfield Playhouse. And in fact, while I'm even giving this a little Bible study with you, don't be too surprised if the sirens go off for us. Well, let's take our Bibles today and turn to Matthew chapter 6, verse 2. We're going to look at Matthew 6:2 today, which reads this way. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. Now, several things that we want to take a look at here. The first is that Jesus presumes that we would be giving to the needy. Sadly, this can't even be assumed in this day and age. The typical American today gives just over 2% of his gross income. And sadly, the person who makes less than $25,000 a year tends to give a higher percentage of his income than does the person who earns between $75,000 and $100,000. It would seem up to that level anyway that the wealthier that someone becomes, the less charitable someone tends to be. Now, the second thing we want to consider in this particular verse is the big deal about hypocrisy. What, after all, is the big deal about hypocrisy? Well, Jesus completely changes the concept of this word from the classical Greek. You see, the word hypocrisy in the Greek is simply the name for actor. And there was certainly nothing negative in the classical Greek language about the concept of someone who is an actor. But in this particular situation, Jesus has a real problem with it. In fact, we see this to be a real theme throughout the book of Matthew. The word hypocrite or hypocrisy or hypocritical is used 18 different times in the New Testament. 13 of those times is here in the book of Matthew. Why do you suppose that is? Well, certainly one of the things that Jesus is very concerned about, that Matthew, more than anyone else, reports to us in the New Testament, is that Jesus is always concerned about the heart behind the action. If you are giving, Jesus says, don't pretend that you're doing so out of a heart of love or an obedience to God, if the reason you're doing it is so that other people would see you and give you praise and glory. Now, a third thing that we need to consider is, what is the reason then behind your giving? What is it that is the why that matters? Well, Jesus says, make sure you don't blow your trumpets. We know of no historical application where people literally blew trumpets ahead of them when they were giving to someone else. Jesus here, I think, is using a figure of speech to give the idea that you're trying to draw attention to yourself. That either you're raising money in such a way that you give people glory and bring them credit and benefit, or that you are giving money yourself so that you can bring yourself glory and honor. Let's just take a look at a few real-life questions today as we look at our own giving. The first most obvious one is, does it really matter when you give whether you get a tax benefit or not? Do you ask God to show you someone who is needy? Do you look for someone who is needy? Is that a lifestyle of yours, is to find the needy in your world? Is your giving a haphazard plan of giving? Or do you consider your giving to be an interruption of your financial life? In other words, do you plan ahead of time? Is there actually a budget item in your budget? If you keep a budget, do you have a budget item for giving money away to people who are needy? Have you even thought about who the needy are? And when it comes to this issue of giving to the church, and of course I'm the pastor of a church, so you might think that, I'm going to be somewhat biased here, but we have to ask the question, does giving to church necessarily equate to giving to the needy? Sometimes the issue of giving to the needy is an entirely different issue than giving to your own church. And then we come to the fourth issue that I just would ask myself as I would be studying this particular verse today, and that is the most obvious: whose praise do I crave? Whose praise do I crave? Now, we're going to talk more about giving secretly tomorrow, but the question that we have to ask today is, are you absolutely sure that you're not concerned about what other men think about your giving? Is it possible for you to be generous without anyone else ever even knowing about it? Or on the other side of the charity equation, if you're raising money for a charity, for the needy, for a church, do you have the ability to raise the money without ever worrying about or giving honor to men? Let's just stop and think about some things that we actually take somewhat for granted in our 21st century America. Can you raise money without getting a name in a brick honoring the donor's name? Or can you do it without putting plaques up on the wall for different giving levels? Is it possible that you can build buildings for a university without putting someone's name who gave the large donation on it? Even our sports stadiums today are sold for naming rights. Of course, this isn't just necessarily giving to the needy, but it does give us an example of our desire to blow the trumpets in the street. Now, you might say, well, Mark, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with putting somebody's name on a university building or giving the naming rights to a sports stadium. Well, hey, I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with it, so long as we understand what it is, and that is giving glory to a man, honoring a man or a company. But if it comes down to this issue of actually giving to the needy, Jesus says, watch out, take heed. Make sure that the heart is equal to the task, and that is to give in secret without anyone else knowing what you're doing. Don't pretend to be God's child, and at the same time be concerned about getting praise or glory or honor for yourself. Hey, thanks for joining me today. This is Pastor Mark Pierce with Church Requel, and we'll be back tomorrow on Friday with another Bible study. Thanks for joining me.